so we're recording now.
Hello, everybody. I am going to introduce Ava Roy, who is the founding artistic director of We Players and is dedicated to transforming public spaces into realms of immersive theater. Since 2008, she has pioneered unique partnerships with both the National Park Service and the California State Park System, creating a large-scale performances at park sites throughout the Bay Area. Her unique style of interactive, site-integrated performance aims to highlight the historical and natural treasures of the local landscape and encourage new ways of experiencing and appreciating these places. Ava is an alumna of Stanford University, where she earned her BA and a self-designed major of ritual and performance in aesthetic education. Ava teaches sensory awareness-based design practice at California College of the Arts in San Francisco. She is a devoted yoga practitioner and a teacher with 2 decades of experience. We Players' production history highlights include Hamlet on Alcatraz, the first artistic residency on the Rock, The Odyssey on Angel Island State Park, Macbeth at Ford Point, Romeo and Juliet at Villa Montevlo, I think I said that right, Roman Women at the Palace of Fine Arts, Caesar Maximus at the Music Concourse, and many, many more. Welcome, Ms. Roy.
Thank you. Gosh, Claire, I don't know that I need to do the presentation. That bio is so long. I feel like we covered a lot of what I'm going to talk about. But it's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. And I'll be honest. Usually, when I have the opportunity to give a talk about my work, I often really invite questions throughout the talk rather than just saving a Q&A for the end. So since you are with me, Claire, feel free to interrupt at any moment or raise a hand or just let me know if you have a question and I say that because in part because it's more dynamic and interesting for me, but I could also talk for hours and hours about my work. And so there's many different areas that I could focus on, this sort of the ritual elements that inspire and motivate the practice, which then creates the art, the environmental engagement and spatial engagement. And of course, today we'll focus more on how I work with the classics to activate them in public spaces. But there's just a lot of different ways in to the work. And so, yeah, feel free to chime in as we go. The other
Definitely.
thing that I'm sorry, go
I
ahead.
definitely will.
Thank you. And the other thing that I'm gonna experiment with is that I would usually give a little bit more of a preamble about to kind of sort of contextualize the work, and um, and I will actually show some slides and kind of talk through a little bit more detail. But we recently made this little 3-minute video, and it's of me leading you through these spaces where we do shows. So I'm actually just going to play that, and then we'll come back together and go into more depth. So this is the part where I share my screen. Oops, except I made you the host, and the host has disabled screen sharing. But you didn't do it on purpose. I probably messed it up when I shared. So if you can give me screen. Let me try now. Nope, not yet. I am the host now. Okay. Great. There we go. It's optimized. Beautiful. Great. Okay. Cool. Enter full screen. Okay, y'all. See you in a couple minutes.
The heart of We Players is to connect people with place through site-integrated theater. Who are those people, those places, and what are the stories we tell? Our people are actors and designers, they're administrative and artistic staff, they're board members and advisors, and they're you, our audience members, our patrons and supporters, our fellow adventurers. While we might like to claim artistic influence over the breaching whale, the flock of pelicans, the hawk taking flight, or any number of such memorable, magical moments, the truth is, we're taking the journey every night, right alongside you, our audience. And the actors are just as surprised and just as delighted by those challenges and gifts that our wild settings provide. We believe that places are potent containers of memory. This directs our exploration of civic spaces and public parks as powerful sites for performance. Our partnership with the National Parks began in 2008 with our first production of Macbeth at Fort Point. Over the past 12 years, we've created work in 14 park sites in collaboration with 6 different government organizations. And we've produced work in some of the most iconic spaces in the Bay Area. If you've attended one of our shows, then you've been encouraged to fully experience your surroundings, to look behind you, below you, above you, and into the distance. This 360-degree, multidimensional philosophy is also the foundation for the way that we construct a piece. We look behind us, back into the history of the place, to inform our artistic choices. We look up and down, high and low, in and out, at the different layers of relevance and meaning that the piece holds for our present moment. And finally, we look in the distance, to the future of the space, to inspire conservation and stewardship. Now, more than ever, it is crucial to support and activate these public lands that provide some peace in a world that seems upside down. Please join us in our commitment to ensure that these parks are comfortable and safe spaces for one and all. We Players developed out of a passion for pairing these timeless themes in classical works with ritual performance to explore public spaces both civic and wild. These stories from the past stretch across the ages and are very much of the time. Stories of greed and corruption, of revenge and renewal, of love, of the silly and the sacred. Far from the blank slate of a typical stage that's shaped by sets and lighting, our stages have so much to say from the very beginning. And it's our job to pay attention and to listen. Our practice roots us in our past and shapes our future by grounding us in the present. Thank you so much for your support. We're thinking about you, and we really miss you. We can't wait until we can gather again. Until then, please take very good care.
So that is a little overview of who we are and what we do. And so, having shared that, I'd like to just kind of drill in a little bit deeper to some of the things that I speak to more broadly in that little video about these main pillars or tenets of the practice: place, choice, movement, and community, and focus in a little bit on how we've realized some of our most classical of classical works, such as the Odyssey. I do a lot of Shakespeare. And in some cases, we're devising new works, like when we get to talking about Roman Women, which is the piece we did at the Palace of Fine Arts. That's a new work that we created out of an ensemble-based devising process, pulling both from Shakespeare, Julius Caesar, but also from the research of various classicists. We were talking before we started recording about Mary Beard, who is a big inspiration for trying to unpack and unearth some of the more hidden stories from that period, the female stories, and so on. Yeah, so I think we'll go in a little more closely to here. So I want to start on Alcatraz Island. This is the audience following. Oops, I haven't shared my screen again yet. Let's do that. Okay, so we'll just kind of go through this fairly quickly. This is on Alcatraz Island. I had the first artistic residency out there from 2009 to 2011. And this one I kind of just, oops, how do we, pardon me. Oh, there we go. Great. Cool. So I wanted to show kind of just go through some of these Alcatraz photos somewhat quickly, because they're some of the photos that give the best sense of scope and scale. And also to remind me to talk about how the show begins sort of in this way of staging things outdoors, site specifically, but more directly or more. A better definition is site integrated, because it's not just set into the place. It's really like listening to the place and trying to unpack a deeper understanding of what the layers of history of that site are. And how do we get at that conversation and at the heart of those themes, or find the threads that connect across the themes of a space and through the layers of history? How do we get at that through story? And so in a lot of cases, I'm working with classical literature, again, ancient Greeks and a lot of Shakespeare. Um, in many ways, because these are such deeply human stories, and in many cases, these profound archetypes. And certainly when we're working with the Greeks, these kind of the mythos that can better help us see ourselves, right? Which is part of why theater emerges, is to have this mirror, to hold us toward the mirror up to nature, which is a line from Hamlet. But it's a way of often getting at these themes that can be very present, very relevant, without directly politicizing them all the time. Or so, for example, on Alcatraz, getting at these themes of choice and consequence, of crime and punishment, of what it means to be free, of being pulled by different moral and filial obligations that conflict, and having to resolve through the self and the psyche what to do and how to act. And rather than creating a piece that's about prisons today on Alcatraz, really try to get at what are the themes of this place and how can a play help us unpack those. So in this case, I chose Hamlet to help us get at those deeper themes that I was kind of just naming. And on Alcatraz, we begin the journey on the boat. So the performance starts with characters on the boat. You arrive on the island, and then you're following the actors, musicians, dancers throughout the space. And in that way, the space really is the other director and scene partner, and is much more powerful and ferocious than all of us combined. So it also very much informs everything, which we'll see as we kind of continue to go through these photos. But this just gives us a sense of just one of many audience configurations possible. In other spaces, the audience will be much more closely together. This is, of course, pre-COVID time, so you will not see masks in these photos. This is from 2010 on the Rock. And this photo just kind of reminds me to speak to how the, hi there, welcome. I'm going to just continue where I am, but welcome, nice to have you. We're on Alcatraz right now, doing a production of Hamlet, following Hamlet all around the island. And here the audience, I really feel that, well, first of all, not only do we try to choose the right play for the right place, and vice versa, and make sure that that's this kind of alchemical relationship where we'll hopefully understand more about the place through the story we tell, and more about the story because of the setting and the way the environment informs the story. Once we have that, then we've got to choose each location for each scene. And similarly, how we experience the performer, the text, informs what we hear and see. So in this case, seeing this particular speech through a chain link fence is going to be very different than where we just were, in this kind of wide open space with the huge lighthouse and cell house tower in the distance behind the actors, and this sense of spaciousness all around with the water. This is much more confined. Very much this framing changes what we hear and what we see and how we see it. This photo also reminds me to talk about the ways nature conspires in our success sometimes, and to our detriment at other times. But here, this is just a natural shaft of light. Goodbye. This is just a natural shaft of light from the sun spotlighting the actor at the perfect moment. And that, of course, doesn't always happen, but it's these kind of moments that happen that, to me, can really remind us that this is a precious, unrepeatable moment that will never happen again just this way, which I think is really powerful about spending time with the classics, because they endure over hundreds of years, of thousands of years, depending on which kind of period of history and part of the world we're talking about. But we keep telling them because the stories have more to tell us all the time, and we hear them and understand them in new ways at stages in our life and in different environments. Here, the audience is neither in this huge open space nor crammed together looking through a fence, but they are right there with Ophelia at the moment of her heartbreak, at the moment when Hamlet has left her. And just, it's a horrible, horrible, devastating scene. And you can see on these audiences' faces that they are right there with her. And there is literally no separation. And the energy is palpable when you're physically that close. Your body listens with other intelligence centers. And so when we're able to have this kinesthetic experience through the space and through the performance, I think we can access a lot more than when we're just sitting and our bodies are still and we're just listening and hearing. But suddenly other parts of us become awakened, and we empathize, which is in large part what theater is supposed to help us do, is to practice our empathy so that we are able to feel connected to these characters we see on the stage who are so unlike us. I'll skip through this one. It's a beautiful photo, but we'll just move along because I'd like to get to some other sites. This is Fort Point, which is a Civil War fortress under the Golden Gate Bridge. And here again, you can see the audience in this kind of expansive space. In many ways, it's a more traditional stage setup. They're trying to arrange themselves in a fairly traditional audience configuration, but they have to keep changing that configuration as they move throughout the space. As I mentioned before, the site informs everything from what we do and where we do it to the soundscape. Here, it's incredibly loud at Fort Point. You can go there. It's, well, I don't know if it's open right now during COVID times. Most of our parks have been shut down or on pause. But at any rate, usually you can go to Fort Point. It's free. Go in inside. And the rumble of the bridge directly overhead, the cars overhead, the pounding of the waves against the building, the foghorn in the distance. So there is a lot of sound. So our music director, our composer, has to work not only with the sounds that we wish him to make and have the musicians make to help tell our story and create atmosphere, but also with the soundscape that's already in the environment. And so here in this case, I remember a rehearsal where he was like using his tuning fork to make sure that he understood that that particular foghorn was an A, because if he was going to have all the rest of the saxophones be toning with the foghorn, he needed it to be in the same key, the same sonic space. So there's a lot of ways that are also invisible that our senses can really enhance our experience. Similarly, we'll also work with what is growing in the space. In some spaces, we're in very lush outdoor environments on the top of a mountain, whatever. Here it's stone, it's cold, it's wet, it's windy, it's intense, it's very brutal at Fort Point, which is kind of perfect for such a brutal play like Macbeth. But there are things that are living and growing in the space, and it's this lichen that grows on the wall. So all this red is actually one of the 3 lichens that grows on the wall. There's a bright green one, and there's a silvery one. And you can see these are the 3 witches. And conceptually, I was working with the way in which the witches were sort of the space. They were sort of the ways that the walls had ears, and they can kind of emerge from and melt back into the space. So their colorings were all derived from actually natural plant dyes native to California that and the color palette was inspired by the space itself. So again, you'll just kind of keep seeing different audience configurations as I move through the photos. Here they're at a 100-foot long banquet table, sharing the banquet before Macbeth starts seeing the ghosts. Again, I'll go a little more quickly until we get to the Odyssey, which is the Odyssey on Angel Island. So when I decided to stage the Odyssey on Angel Island, I wanted it to really be an Odyssey and to use as much of the 800-acre island stage as I could. So this was a 6-hour experience. You got on a ferry either in San Francisco or in Tiburon, and you took the ferry out to Angel Island. And the piece begins as soon as you're on the island and continues afterwards. You follow Telemachus, Odysseus's son, around the island. So you walk almost 5 miles over the course of the experience. Welcome. We are currently on Angel Island following Telemachus around in an interactive production on this island. So here it's kind of fun that we were just at Fort Point a moment ago because now we are looking at it across the water. And so these are ways when staging things like this, I get so much participation from this massive environs. And as we talked about at the beginning, or as I talked about at the beginning, the way that places hold memory and tell stories, and the context gives us information too. So back when we were in that picture of Hamlet, we're able to be on the rock, having this story, immersed in this experience, and then look at the city where our house is somewhere that we can't get to until we cross that body of water. And that helps deepen the thematic experience, the visual metaphor of freedom and what it means to be free. In this case, we have all these ways in which this, as we do a 360-degree circumnavigation on foot around Angel Island, we're going to see every part of the bay. And as we move around the island, that backdrop is going to change and shift what we see and how we feel based on what that backdrop is. I wish I had a version that didn't have this quote, was a little bigger, but this I wanted to include because audience participation can look more simple, like a dance that we teach everyone where the instructions are as simple as hold hands and follow the leader, and it goes pretty smoothly. And in other cases, we'll have a lot more agency and choice. So what leads up to this next photo is that we meet Zeus on his golden bicycle at the crossroads, and we can literally choose one of 3 directions. And just like life, you can't go in all directions at once. And so our audience, which at that point we're about 3 hours into this 6-hour experience by this point, we've just come to the top of the hill, we're tired, and the audience that's been together this whole time now has to break apart and decide who's going to go where. So one group has to run and sprint to take the obstacle course, which is our manifestation of Scylla and Charybdis. So this is on the Nike missile launching station. So in the Nike missile launching station, the missile silos are beneath your feet. We have a really long period of military history on Angel Island, from the Civil War all the way through the Cold War. And so these tentacles are basically tentacles made out of giant parachute, ripstop nylon with huge fans in the silos, so that these kind of arms were shooting up at the obstacle course folks as they kind of ran through this gauntlet, which was our sort of manifestation of Charybdis. Or you could, and if you were going to do the obstacle course, you had to give your bag to somebody else in the audience and run and sprint and follow Telemachus. And if you were one of the people who were going to go cheer on the heroes, you were going to take their bags, follow Zeus and his golden megaphone. There was a lot of gold spray paint involved in this production. Many cans of gold spray paint were harmed in 2012. And you go to the top of this hill and you cheer them on, or you go and there they are with Zeus in all his glory, cheering on the people down below. I don't have a photo today this is actually Calypso on the beach, of the third option, but that was where you went to this World War II era chapel, and these beautiful, it was a temple to Minerva, and it was this kind of ceremonial space. After that, you end up, after you go to the House of the Dead, blah, blah. But before I jump through that, actually, the House of the Dead was interesting because it reminds me to speak to these ways in which nature, sometimes there's a helicopter that goes by overhead, and that's unfortunate and distracts you, and then you got to kind of come back. But there really can be this sense of being transported into this alternate universe, into the world of Odysseus. Into Hamlet's Denmark, into these spaces, because the environment starts to participate. And maybe it's participating and maybe you're just perceiving it that way, but at a certain point it's reflexive. It doesn't really matter, because you notice that there's a hawk on the top of the cliff above Zeus's head, and you have this connection, maybe depending on your relationship to the mythos. You might think, that's curious. You get to the House of the Dead, and I swear to goodness, like clockwork, this black raven would come and roost right before Tiresias would drop his big long chiffon tongue straw to suck up the blood offering that we had made. And it was like, really, every day, this crow? So sometimes you get these ways that nature can really participate. Here's Calypso making an offering. This was the most expensive prop I've ever invested in. We bought a speedboat for 60 seconds of a 6-hour show so that Hermes could arrive to Calypso's beach with his golden entourage of trumpeters in his golden lame suit with his golden PFD. So there's lots of ways that we can kind of, in the site-specific way, expand to meet the magnitude of these mythologies and make it fun, make it relatable, make it contemporary with the playfulness, with the spirit of play that storytelling allows and invites. I'm going to skip through the Undine ones fairly quickly. This is more of a fairy tale than derived from a fairy tale more than a classical mythology. Well, that's not exactly true, because the story of an Undine goes, or mermaid creatures goes pretty far back. So this is about a woman from the sea. And this is at Sutra Baths. And Sutra Baths is a really interesting place to work in terms of this theme of classics, because it's this modern ruin, right? It's not actually that old. And yet it has the feeling of an ancient space because we just have this kind of stone footprint. So I think some of these places also really invite us to look at the layers of history that are there, and we're bringing our own layer, right? Like we're putting our own story on top of it, or we are the new layer of history. And I think some of these places, it's easier to feel that in a place like this than, I don't know, walking down the sidewalk or something. But I think that sometimes spending these kind of concentrated experiences in the heightened state of performance, which is what performance is in large part, is this heightened version of life, and framed and magnified. And what this work does is kind of does that, but then also blurs the edges of, well, where does the real world begin and end? And hopefully when we have these kind of 6-hour odysseys on Angel Island, or 3-hour journeys with Undine and so on, these are just some of the Undines. We'll get to the palace. That when you have these concentrated experiences, maybe you are just a little tiny bit more likely to start doing that in your daily life, to start looking up behind you, below you, to notice, you know what, actually there are hawks all over San Francisco, and they're on the roof of this building right now, or it's this process of paying attention, right? And I think that by doing some of these classical stories that are familiar, that we know, or these mythologies or these archetypes that we know, and we start to see them in new contexts, I think we get better with practice over time at doing that, of starting to associate, and our life becomes richer, which is in many ways what the ancients were teaching us through creating mythology, is how do we better see ourselves in the art that we make, in the stories that we tell, in the architecture we build. How am I doing on time?
You have slightly less than 10 minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'll just, it's worth, I think, spending a moment with the palace just to kind of come back to such a classical looking structure, neoclassical structure. In fact, this was built as part of the 1918 World's Fair, designed by Maybach. And it was meant to be temporary, as all the World's Fair structures were meant to be torn down. But San Franciscans of the time fell so in love with it that they said, no, we want to keep it. And so there was, it basically was rebuilt with materials that could withstand time. And this piece, so I did in 2018, I spent a year working with the ancient Roman Republic and Julius Caesar, and we were headed towards doing this production called Caesar Maximus at the Music Concourse. And I had cast a woman as Caesar. And I am very whatever, we do a lot of different casting, and sometimes a woman is just like Hamlet was played by a woman in those shots we saw earlier. But in that case, it was Hamlet the guy. We didn't change the pronouns. It just happened to be played by a female actor. In the case of Caesar, it was a female playing this male role, but we made her female. And we're imagining what would it be like if Caesar were a woman, and how does that change the manifestation of this story or this character. But as we were doing the research for Caesar, I was like, where are all the women? I'm pretty sure there's more than Portia and Calpurnia in all of Rome. Like, where are they? And that's when I got interested in Mary Beard, who was like, cool, this classicist who I could really relate to. And she had just written SPQR, and I was into that. And she has this, like I was telling Claire before, you should check out her little like 6-part TV series. She's adorable and super fun. And she takes you into, what about the slaves who made up more than half the population of Rome? What about the women? What about childbirth? What about um, the common people, the worker, right? We have so much information and contemporary accounts that's really incredible, but it's only from one part of the story. It's only from the patrician male class. Um, so we went to the Palace of Fine Arts, which is a very female space. I mean, it feels very much like a womb. It's got this gorgeous honeycomb interior ceiling, and there are all these women throughout in the friezes holding garlands. There's the weeping women at the top of it, which actually, I guess you can probably, there's the female angels in here looking down, guarding you. There's the weeping women on top up here. There's women in the friezes, and it's very circular, the whole space. And so that became really interesting for us, of actually letting the physical structure of the space be the choreographer. And so in this case, the women, we would do these experiments in the space and follow the contours of the space. You can kind of see in this photo, there's these circles on the ground. So we would walk them and we would try them forward and backward and in different pathways and weave in and out of these columns and these archways and really sort of let the space design the movement, both the way in which the audience would move through it, but also the way in which we would move through it. Um, and of course, I could tell you more about this or about Caesar, but I'm mindful that there's only a few minutes and I've left no space for you to shut me up and ask questions. So I'm curious if you'd like to know something specific in my last few minutes.
How do you choose where you're going to perform these things? Do you reach out to the park services with an idea in mind? Do they reach out to you? How does that relationship work? I'm super curious.
Yeah, it first started with me reaching out to the park. I think the first time I worked with the National Park Service was 2008. And that was a long, slow, patient process of showing up and showing up again and showing up some more and continuing to show up. And, but, and actually, even before that, in 2006, I worked at the Albany Bulb and did the Tempest at the Albany Bulb, which is in Albany, which is between Berkeley and Richmond. And that site was like part regional park and part city. So I'd worked with other sites before, and that was again approaching. But once I had basically after I had started to work with the park and some park people could see what I was doing, it made sense. It can be really hard to understand what the heck this is until you are physically in the experience, moving through it. And from that, luckily, actually, a really key visionary in the Park Service, Amy Breeze, saw the first piece that I did with the Park Service, and she was the new site supervisor on Alcatraz, and she invited me out to Alcatraz. And that gave me a platform for several years to really develop work. And since then, it's been kind of a combination of people reaching out to me or me reaching out to them or building on relationships from the past. Yeah, go ahead.
I realize that you've discussed this a little bit. How does visiting all of these different places affect your perspective on life and your daily routine?
Ooh, what a good question. How does visiting all these sites affect my perspective on life and my daily routine?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Well, in terms of how it affects my perspective on life, gosh, I feel like I have a bunch of answers to that. So that's a fun one. I feel like one thing it enhances is um, I feel like I feel so blessed because I get to spend all my time working, not all my time, but a lot of my time working outside. Yes, sometimes in the freezing cold and brutal wind, but also, I mean, there were three white owls that lived at the palace that started to show themselves to us after a month of rehearsal. So I start to have, I guess the way it affects my experience and my perspective of life is there's so much magic and wonder in the world. And the more time we spend actually listening and paying attention and quieting down the noise of all the shoulds and all the comings and goings. And that space could be a patch of earth in your front yard. It could be the public park nearest you. In some of these cases, I'm really lucky because I get to be in these sites and they're so tremendous, but they're also all public parks that anyone can go to. And I think that when we spend time in a place and we listen to the site, not just with our dominant sense of sight, but we actually listen with our other senses and we spend time, that it opens us to wonder. It opens me to wonder. It opens me to magic. It opens me to respect for ancestry, for who else has been here. When did this get here? How else was it used? How might it be used? So I think it really connects me to the past and the future by grounding me in the present, which is funny because I think that's a line in that little video I showed at the beginning and it came out. It turns out I think that's true. So thank you for asking that. My daily routine, I don't know. I think my daily routine, it's a lot more of the like, of it, right? It's like, oh, it's cold. Like, good thing I have layers. I'm like, I think my daily routine is I'm super practiced at self-sufficiency. Like I always have a lot of snacks, a lot of layers, a first aid kit, a multi-tool. Like I am ready because that's how it's shaped my day to day. And the way it's shaped my like heart and mind is the former answer. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
I understand you've been to a variety of many different places, and like you mentioned in the previous answer, that's been very eye-opening and offered a variety of perspectives. But what do you think was the most creative or your personal favorite set or place that you've acted on and cast?
Thanks. Oh gosh. This might sound whatever how it's going to sound, but it's like asking a mother which child is her favorite. It's like I love them all. They've and I love them all in different ways at different times. Like sometimes they've been really hard on me and I don't love them as much until I'm further away from them. So it's kind of hard to answer, but I really do invest where I am. So like right now I'm really in love with McLaren Park because I'm building a new piece for McLaren Park. It's called Psychopomp. And here's a fun little teaser graphic for you. So Psychopomp is a new work that we're building that is inspired by psychopomps and psychopomps throughout various mythologies. So we've got everybody from Hermes and Charon, the riverboat driver from Greece, to Anubis, the jackal-headed god from Egypt, to Papagede, the New Orleans Haitian voodoo first person to die, and across this kind of wide panoply of different cultures and places. So right now I'm really in love with McLaren Park because it's new and that's where the discovery is and that's where rehearsal's happening and that's where these new moments of magic are being revealed. So yeah, it's hard to have a favorite.
I think that that's the perfect note to end on. Thank you
Great.
so much for joining us today.
Yeah, and I'd love to share this new piece with you. So it opens in the middle of May. And if you're interested to find out more, you can go to weplayers.org, weplayers.org, but you won't find anything about Psychopomp until Monday because that web page doesn't go live till Monday. So thank you all so much and enjoy the rest of your conference, your colloquium.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.